England, 1810. The morning fog clung to the rolling hills of Willowmere Estate like a shroud, mirroring the heaviness that had settled in Lady Caroline Ashton's heart over 6 years of marriage. She stood at the window of her drawing-room, watching raindrops trace paths down the glass, much like the silent tears that had mapped her cheeks for years. "My lady," came the soft voice of her lady's maid, Elizabeth. "The solicitor has arrived to discuss the late Viscount's affairs." Caroline nodded, straightening her black mourning dress. 3 months had passed since Edmund Ashton, Viscount Radley, had been thrown from his horse during a hunting expedition. 3 months of expected grief that had never truly materialized. Only relief, followed immediately by guilt for feeling such relief. "Thank you, Elizabeth. I shall receive him in the library." The Willowmere Library was Edmund's domain, a place where Caroline had rarely been welcomed. Dark mahogany shelves lined with leather-bound volumes he never read, collected merely for appearance. Like herself, she often thought, acquired for show, not for love. Mr. Harrison, the family solicitor, rose when she entered. His face bore the expression she had grown accustomed to seeing, pity mingled with discomfort at addressing business matters with a mere woman. "Lady Radley," he began, using her formal title. "Lady Caroline, please," she corrected gently. "I find I prefer it." The solicitor cleared his throat. "Very well. I've completed the review of the late Viscount's affairs, and I'm afraid the situation is concerning." Caroline's hands folded in her lap. "Please speak plainly, Mr. Harrison. The estate is encumbered with significant debt. The Viscount made several unfortunate investments in shipping ventures that have failed. Additionally, there were substantial gambling losses." The room seemed to tilt slightly. "How substantial?" "Willowmere itself is not at risk due to the entailment. It passes to the Viscount's cousin, Mr. Richard Ashton. However, your personal situation—" He hesitated. "My personal situation?" Caroline prompted, her voice steadier than she felt. "The jointure set aside for your widowhood is modest at best. You will have enough to maintain a small household, perhaps in Bath or another provincial town, but certainly not to continue in London society as you have been accustomed." Caroline nearly laughed. Accustomed? Edmund had paraded her at select events when it suited him, then relegated her to Willowmere for months at a time while he enjoyed London's diversions. "I see," she said simply. "When must I vacate Willowmere?" "Mr. Richard Ashton arrives from Yorkshire in a fortnight. He has graciously allowed you until the end of the month to make arrangements." Graciously. 3 weeks to dismantle 6 years of her life. "Thank you for your candor, Mr. Harrison." After the solicitor departed, Caroline returned to the window. The rain had intensified, lashing against the glass. In the distance, she could see Edmund's prized rose gardens, beautiful but thorned, like so much of the life he had crafted. Later that evening, a letter arrived bearing the seal of the Dowager Countess of Harewood, her godmother, and one of the few people who had shown Caroline genuine kindness during her marriage. "My dearest Caroline, news of your circumstances has reached me. You must know that I would never allow my goddaughter to face such trials alone. I insist you come to London and stay with me for the season. At 26 you are still young, and after an appropriate mourning period you must rejoin society. The tongue's memory is short, particularly when one possesses your beauty and gentle nature. A fresh start awaits you, if you have the courage to claim it." With deepest affection, Lady Harewood Caroline pressed the letter to her heart, the first spark of hope kindling within her. Perhaps there was life beyond Willowmere's shadows after all. 6 months later, London hummed with excitement as the season commenced. Caroline sat in Lady Harewood's carriage as they approached Grosvenor Square, anxiety threading through her veins. "Remember, my dear," the Dowager Countess said, patting Caroline's gloved hand, "you are no longer under Edmund's thumb. You may now speak with whom you please, dance if you wish, though perhaps not too much given your half-mourning status, and begin to live again." Caroline's grey half-mourning gown, the most vibrant thing she had worn in years, felt both foreign and liberating. "I'm afraid I've forgotten how to converse with anyone besides the household staff. Edmund discouraged friendships. Nonsense. You were the brightest debutante of your season before that man claimed you. That light is still within you." The Harewood townhouse bustled with activity as they arrived. Lady Harewood had arranged a small dinner party. "Just 30 of our closest friends," she declared, as Caroline's gentle reintroduction to society. As she descended the staircase that evening, conversations momentarily halted. Caroline felt the weight of curious gazes, some sympathetic, others calculating. The Viscount Radley's widow had emerged from seclusion, and London society thrived on such developments. "Lady Caroline," came a warm voice. She turned to see Lady Sophia Bennet, once her closest friend before Edmund had deemed their friendship unnecessary. "Sophia," Caroline smiled genuinely for the first time that evening, "how wonderful to see you. I've missed you terribly. Letters are poor substitutes for conversation." "Edmund found our correspondence frivolous," Caroline admitted quietly. Sophia's expression darkened. "Edmund found many things frivolous that brought you joy. But he is gone now, and you are here." She squeezed Caroline's hands. "And there are many who would delight in making your acquaintance, or renewing it." As if on cue, Lady Harewood appeared with a tall gentleman in tow. "Caroline, may I present Lord James Blackwood, Earl of Westmoreland? James, my goddaughter, Lady Caroline Ashton." The Earl bowed elegantly. "A pleasure, Lady Caroline. Your godmother speaks of you with such affection. I feel as though I know you already." Caroline curtsied, surprised by the man's genuine smile. "I fear her affection colours her descriptions too favourably, my lord." "I doubt that very much," he replied. "I hope you'll reserve a dance for me at Lady Richmond's ball next week." Before Caroline could respond, a commotion at the entrance to the ballroom drew everyone's attention. "The Duke of Pemberton," the butler announced. The crowd parted as Alexander Sinclair, the Duke of Pemberton, entered. At 33, he was the most eligible bachelor in England, wealthy beyond measure with estates across the country and a face that could have been sculpted by Michelangelo himself. Caroline had seen him from afar at events before her marriage, but Edmund had considered him too progressive in his politics for proper association. Now, watching him move through the room with easy confidence, she understood the fascination he inspired. Unlike many peers who flaunted their status, the Duke dressed with understated elegance. His only concession to ornamentation was a single ruby stickpin in his cravat, which caught the light as he turned. "Ah, Alexander," Lady Harewood called. "Come meet my goddaughter." To Caroline's surprise, the Duke approached immediately. His eyes, a striking blue that reminded her of the summer sky over Willowmere, assessed her with unexpected intensity. "Your Grace, may I present Lady Caroline Ashton?" Lady Harewood said. "Caroline, His Grace, the Duke of Pemberton." "Lady Caroline." His voice was deeper than she expected, with a resonance that seemed to vibrate through her very bones as he bowed. "I believe we crossed paths some years ago, though we were never formally introduced." "Indeed, Your Grace, at Lady Hamilton's musicale, I believe." A flicker of surprise crossed his features. "You have an excellent memory." "It was indeed at Lady Hamilton's, where you played Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata with remarkable feeling." Caroline felt heat rise to her cheeks. "You flatter me, Your Grace. It was an amateur performance at best." "I never offer flattery, Lady Caroline, only truth." His gaze held hers a moment longer than propriety dictated. "I hope to hear you play again some day." As dinner was announced, Caroline found herself seated between Lord Westmoreland and an elderly viscount whose name she immediately forgot. Throughout the meal she was acutely aware of the Duke of Pemberton seated across and 2 places down, occasionally glancing in her direction when he thought she wouldn't notice. Later, as the gentlemen rejoined the ladies after port, Caroline retreated to a quiet corner near the terrace doors, needing a moment's respite from the constant vigilance required by society. "Finding the crowd overwhelming?" came the Duke's voice as he approached, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. Caroline straightened. "Merely taking a moment to collect my thoughts, Your Grace." He offered her one of the glasses. 6 months of mourning at Willowmere must make London seem especially chaotic. You know of Willowmere? I know of most significant estates in England, my own property in Kent, Briarwood, neighbours your late husband's hunting grounds." He paused. "Please accept my condolences, though they come late." "Thank you, Your Grace," she replied automatically, the expected response ingrained by months of receiving such sentiments. The Duke studied her face. "Forgive me for speaking plainly, Lady Caroline, but you do not appear devastated by your loss." Caroline nearly choked on her champagne. "I beg your pardon? That was unconscionably forward of me." He looked genuinely contrite. "Please disregard—" "No," Caroline interrupted, surprising herself. "You merely observed what is true. My marriage was not— She searched for an appropriate word. It was not what I had hoped for when I was an optimistic debutante of 18. Something flickered in the Duke's eyes. Understanding, perhaps. Few marriages among our class are. We are fortunate if we find mere tolerance, let alone affection. Is that why you remain unmarried, Your Grace, avoiding mere tolerance? His lips curved into a smile that transformed his entire countenance. Perhaps I simply haven't met a woman who would tolerate me. Caroline found herself smiling in return. Somehow I doubt that very much. There it is, he said softly. I beg your pardon? Your smile. It's the first genuine one I've seen from you this evening. He bowed slightly. I shall count, drawing it forth as my achievement for the night. Good evening, Lady Caroline. As he walked away, Caroline became aware of multiple gazes fixed upon her, some curious, others openly disapproving. The Duke of Pemberton rarely engaged in extended conversation with anyone at social gatherings, let alone a widow in half-mourning. Lady Harewood appeared at her side. Well, my dear, it seems you've made quite an impression on Alexander. Surely he was merely being polite. Alexander Sinclair is many things, but merely polite is not among them. When he shows interest, it is genuine. She patted Caroline's hand. Come, Lord Westmoreland has been looking for you, and one must not favour a duke so obviously that other worthy gentlemen feel slighted. As Caroline moved through the remainder of the evening, she found her thoughts returning to the Duke of Pemberton's perceptive gaze and that brief moment when propriety had fallen away between them. For the first time in years, she felt a flutter of something long forgotten, not merely hope but possibility. What she didn't notice was the calculating gaze of Lord Richard Ashton, her late husband's cousin and the new Viscount Radley, watching her interaction with the Duke from across the room, his expression darkening with each passing moment. Lady Richmond's ball the following week was the highlight of the early season, an affair so lavish that invitations were coveted like rare jewels. Caroline stood at the perimeter of the ballroom, watching couples sweep across the floor in a country dance. Lady Caroline, Lord Westmoreland appeared at her side, bowing. I believe you promised me a dance this evening. She smiled at the Earl, who had called at Lady Harewood's house twice since their dinner. Indeed I did, my lord. As he led her onto the floor, Caroline felt eyes upon her. Half-mourning was an awkward state, no longer confined to complete seclusion, yet not fully returned to society's embrace. Her dove-grey gown with subtle lavender trim marked her status clearly. How you dance beautifully, Lord Westmoreland commented as they moved through the figures of the dance, though I sense your thoughts are elsewhere. Forgive me, Caroline replied. I'm relearning the rhythms of society. There is nothing to forgive. Your situation calls for adjustment. His kind eyes softened. I hope you know there are those who wish only for your happiness. The sincerity in his voice touched her. James Blackwood was everything proper society valued, titled, wealthy, and possessed of impeccable lineage. His late wife had died in childbirth 3 years prior, leaving him with a young daughter. He would make a sensible match for a widow with a modest jointure. Sensible. The word echoed hollowly. Hadn't she already endured a sensible match? As the dance concluded, a familiar voice spoke behind her. Lady Caroline. She turned to find the Duke of Pemberton, resplendent in midnight blue evening attire that enhanced the striking colour of his eyes. Your Grace. She curtsied as Lord Westmoreland bowed stiffly beside her. Pemberton, the Earl acknowledged. I wasn't aware you attended balls these days. You've been conspicuously absent from most this season. I find myself more selective about which invitations I accept, the Duke replied smoothly, before turning to Caroline. I wonder if I might claim the next dance, Lady Caroline. A murmur rippled through nearby observers. The Duke of Pemberton rarely danced at all, and certainly not with women in mourning, however partial. I believe the next dance is a waltz, Your Grace, Caroline said carefully. The waltz remained somewhat controversial, and for a widow to dance it could raise eyebrows. So it is, he confirmed, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. Do you waltz, Lady Caroline? The challenge in his question was unmistakable. Caroline glanced at Lady Harewood across the room, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. I do, Your Grace, though it has been some time. Then I shall endeavour to lead clearly. He extended his hand. As his gloved hand closed around hers, Caroline felt an unexpected jolt of awareness. The Duke led her to the center of the floor, just as the orchestra struck the opening notes of a Viennese waltz. His right hand settled at her waist, as his left took her right hand, maintaining the proper distance between them. Yet even with this correct spacing, Caroline felt an intimacy in the dance that the country dance with Lord Westmoreland had lacked entirely. "People are staring," she murmured as they began to move. "Let them," he replied simply. "London society suffers from a dearth of genuinely interesting occurrences. We are providing a service, really." A laugh escaped her before she could suppress it. "Is that your aim, Your Grace? To provide gossip fodder for the ton?" "My aim," he said, guiding her through a perfect turn, "is to dance with the most intriguing woman in the room." Caroline nearly missed a step. "Now I know you're being insincere. There are countless young debutantes whose company would be far more advantageous to a duke." "Advantageous," he repeated, his voice tinged with something like distaste. What an utterly dreary criterion for choosing one's dance partners. As they moved across the floor, Caroline became aware that other couples had given them a wider berth than necessary, the better to observe this unexpected pairing. "I must warn you," she said, "that associating with me may not be beneficial to your reputation. I am not in the best of standing with certain circles, because your husband left you in financial difficulty." At her startled look, he added, "London thrives on information, Lady Caroline. Little remains private for long." "Then you know I have nothing to offer beyond my questionable company." "On the contrary," he said, his eyes holding hers as they turned again. "You offer conversation unmarred by artifice, which is vanishingly rare in our circles. You also play Beethoven beautifully, if memory serves." The music swelled, and for a moment Caroline forgot about the watching crowd, lost in the simple pleasure of moving in perfect harmony with a partner who led with confidence but without domination, so unlike the controlling grip Edmund had employed in the few dances they had shared. As the waltz concluded, the Duke did not immediately release her hand. "Would you consider another turn about the floor after a suitable interval, perhaps the next waltz?" Dancing 2 consecutive dances with the same partner bordered on a declaration of intent. "Your Grace, I'm not certain that would be wise." "Wisdom is overrated, Lady Caroline. Sometimes courage proves far more rewarding." Before she could respond, Lady Harewood approached. "Alexander, you dance with unexpected grace for a man who so often claims to despise the activity." He bowed to the Countess. "Perhaps I simply required the right partner, Lady Harewood." "Indeed," the Dowager replied, her shrewd eyes assessing the situation. "Caroline, Lady Sophia has been looking for you. She's by the refreshment table." Caroline recognized the tactful dismissal. "If you'll excuse me, Your Grace." "Lady Harewood." She curtsied and retreated, feeling the weight of the Duke's gaze following her. Sophia waited with 2 glasses of lemonade, her eyes wide. "Caroline Ashton, one dance with the Duke of Pemberton, and you've set the entire ballroom ablaze with speculation." Caroline accepted the lemonade gratefully. "It was only a dance, Sophia." "It was a waltz with the most eligible bachelor in England, who hasn't danced with anyone in at least 3 years, according to Lady Jersey." Sophia leaned closer. "And he couldn't take his eyes off you." "Don't be absurd. The Duke was merely being kind to Lady Harewood's goddaughter. Alexander Sinclair is many things, but merely kind is not among them. When he shows attention, it is deliberate." Caroline nearly laughed at the echo of her godmother's earlier assessment. "You and Lady Harewood are in remarkable agreement about the Duke's character." "Because we are correct," Sophia insisted. "Oh, don't look now, but Lord Richard is approaching and he appears most displeased." Caroline tensed. Richard Ashton, now Viscount Radley, had made no secret of his disdain for her during his brief stay at Willowmere after Edmund's death. He had inspected the estate like a merchant assessing goods, barely acknowledging Caroline's presence, except to inquire when she would vacate the premises. "Lady Caroline," his voice was as cold as she remembered, "how unexpected to see you participating so enthusiastically in the season's festivities. Your period of mourning seems to have concluded with remarkable speed." Caroline maintained her composure. "Good evening, Lord Radley. 6 months of deep mourning is the standard observance for a widow, as I'm certain you're aware. I now enter half mourning, as is appropriate." "Appropriate," he repeated, his gaze flicking to where the Duke of Pemberton stood conversing with Lord Westmoreland. Some might question whether waltzing with eligible bachelors falls within the boundaries of appropriate behavior for my cousin's widow. Some might question whether addressing your cousin's widow with such discourtesy falls within the boundaries of gentlemanly behavior, came Lady Harewood's voice as she joined them, her expression pleasant but her eyes sharp. Richard's jaw tightened. Lady Harewood, I meant no disrespect. I merely expressed concern for Lady Caroline's reputation. How thoughtful, the Countess replied dryly. Rest assured, Lord Radley, that as Caroline's godmother and hostess, I am vigilant regarding her social standing. Your concern, while touching, is unnecessary. Dismissed so thoroughly, Richard had little choice but to bow stiffly and withdraw. Insufferable man, Lady Harewood muttered once he was out of earshot. Always had an inflated sense of his own consequence, even as a boy. He resents that Edmund married at all, Caroline explained to Sophia. Had my husband remained a bachelor, Richard would have inherited everything immediately rather than waiting for Edmund's death. And now he resents that you might make an advantageous second marriage, Lady Harewood added shrewdly. I have no such plans, Caroline protested. Perhaps not consciously, her godmother replied. But Alexander's interest has been noted, and Richard is astute enough to recognize what it could mean for your future, and by extension, for the gossip regarding the Ashton family affairs. Before Caroline could respond, the orchestra began tuning for the next dance set. Her heart quickened as she saw the Duke of Pemberton approaching once more, his expression determined. Lady Caroline, he bowed, I believe the next waltz is about to commence. Lady Harewood raised an eyebrow. 2 waltzes in one evening, Alexander? How unprecedented. I find myself inspired to break with tedious convention, he replied, his eyes never leaving Caroline's face. Lady Caroline? Everything within her cautioned against accepting propriety, prudence, self-preservation. Yet some long-dormant part of her, some ember of the spirited girl she had been before Edmund had systematically extinguished her light, urged her forward. Yes, Your Grace, she said, placing her hand in his outstretched one. I would be delighted. As they took position for the second waltz, the buzz of conversation grew louder. 2 dances with the same partner was a clear statement of interest. For the notoriously selective Duke of Pemberton to make such a declaration about a widow in half-mourning with limited fortune was unprecedented. You realize what you're doing? Caroline asked quietly as they began to move. Enjoying a waltz with an exceptional dance partner, he replied. Though if you're referring to the social implications, yes, I am fully aware. Why? The question escaped before she could reconsider its boldness. His eyes held hers, serious now. Because in a world of artifice and calculation you speak truth, because you smile rarely, but when you do, it transforms your entire countenance. Because you endured 6 years of what I suspect was a deeply unhappy marriage, yet emerged with your dignity and compassion intact. Caroline felt her cheeks warm at his frank assessment. You cannot possibly know these things about me from our brief acquaintance. I'm an excellent judge of character, Lady Caroline. It's a necessary skill when one is constantly surrounded by fortune hunters and sycophants. His hand at her waist guided her through another turn. But if you prefer, we could approach this scientifically. Allow me to court you properly, and we shall discover whether my initial impressions prove accurate. The music swelled around them as Caroline struggled to find an appropriate response to such direct speech. You cannot mean to court a widow of modest means and questionable connections. The ton would be scandalized. The ton's primary occupation is being scandalized. They would be bereft without fresh material. His expression softened. Say yes, Lady Caroline. Allow me to call on you tomorrow. The dance was ending, their time running out. Caroline felt balanced on a knife's edge between the safe, expected path of gradual reintegration into society and the wild, uncertain prospect the Duke offered. Yes, she said finally, the word barely audible above the final notes of the waltz. His answering smile was like sunrise breaking over Willowmere's hills, radiant and full of promise. Tomorrow, then. 2 o'clock. As he escorted her back to Lady Harewood's side, Caroline became acutely aware that every eye in the ballroom was upon them. Lady Jersey, the patroness of Almack's and arbiter of social acceptance, watched with narrowed eyes. Lord Westmoreland's expression held resigned disappointment, and Richard Ashton's face was contorted with naked fury. "Well," Lady Harewood said as the Duke bowed and departed, "it seems you have managed to accomplish in one evening what an entire season cannot guarantee for most young ladies, securing the undivided attention of the Duke of Pemberton." "I've done nothing to encourage him," Caroline protested weakly. "My dear girl," her godmother replied, "your very existence encourages him. Now come, we must prepare for the onslaught of morning callers that will inevitably descend tomorrow, eager for details." As their carriage rolled through London's darkened streets later that night, Caroline gazed out at the gas lamps, illuminating the fashionable districts. For 6 years, she had lived as a ghost in her own life, moving through the motions of existence without truly participating. Tonight, for the first time since her ill-fated marriage, she felt fully present, awakened to possibility. Yet even as hope blossomed, a shadow of foreboding crept along the edges of her consciousness. Edmund had taught her through painful experience that happiness was fragile, easily shattered by the cruelties fate could devise. The question that remained as she prepared for bed was whether she possessed the courage to risk her heart again, knowing how devastating the consequences of failure could be. The Duke of Pemberton arrived precisely at 2 o'clock the following afternoon, sending Lady Harewood's normally unflappable butler into a state of barely concealed excitement. Caroline waited in the drawing room, having changed her dress 3 times before settling on a lavender day dress that complemented her auburn hair without appearing too eager to abandon mourning colours. "His Grace, the Duke of Pemberton," the butler announced with an extra flourish. Alexander entered carrying a small bouquet of violets and white roses. "Lady Caroline," he bowed, "I trust I find you well after last evening's festivities." "Quite well, Your Grace, thank you." She gestured to a chair. "Please sit." He presented the flowers before taking his seat. Violets seemed appropriate, subtle beauty that often goes unnoticed among showier blooms. The thoughtful comparison touched her. "Thank you. They're lovely." Lady Harewood, fulfilling her role as chaperone, sat across the room with her embroidery, close enough to observe propriety, yet far enough to allow some privacy in conversation. "I must confess," Alexander began, "that I've taken the liberty of making some inquiries about Willowmere's situation." Caroline stiffened. "You've been investigating my late husband's affairs." "Not precisely. Rather, I've been consulting with my man of business regarding certain shipping ventures that failed shortly before Viscount Radley's death." His eyes held hers steadily. "The same ventures that contributed significantly to your current financial constraints." "I fail to see how my financial situation concerns the Duke of Pemberton," Caroline replied carefully. "It concerns me because I suspect there is more to those failures than simple misfortune." He leaned forward slightly. "Lady Caroline, do you recall the names of any specific ships or companies your husband invested in?" The conversation had taken an unexpected turn. The East India Company, naturally, and something called the Caribbean Trading Consortium, I believe. "Edmund rarely discussed business matters with me." Alexander's expression sharpened. "The Caribbean Trading Consortium. Are you certain?" "Yes. I remember because of the unusual medallion Edmund received when he joined their investors, bronze with a sailing ship." "Why do you ask?" "Because the Caribbean Trading Consortium doesn't exist, at least not as a legitimate enterprise." His voice lowered. "It's a front for something else entirely." Caroline felt as though the floor had tilted beneath her. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm not entirely certain yet, but I have reason to believe your husband may have been involved in something irregular, possibly illegal." "That's absurd," Caroline protested, though without conviction. Edmund had been secretive about his business dealings, often disappearing to Liverpool for days without explanation. What possible illegal activity could a viscount be engaged in? Alexander glanced toward Lady Harewood, ensuring she remained occupied with her needlework. "There are rumors of certain aristocrats investing in prohibited trade routes, circumventing the blockades against Napoleon's France." Caroline's hand flew to her throat. "Treason. You cannot seriously suggest—" "Not necessarily treason," he amended quickly, "perhaps merely smuggling luxury goods to avoid tariffs. But whatever it was, I believe it connects to your husband's death and the subsequent revelation of his financial ruin." Why would you investigate such matters? Caroline asked, her mind reeling. Initially, out of curiosity about your situation. Then, as connections emerged to certain inquiries I was already pursuing, he hesitated. I serve on a committee that advises Parliament on maritime regulations. Unusual patterns in shipping losses came to our attention last year. A knock at the drawing-room door interrupted them. Lady Harewood's maid entered with a calling card on a silver tray. Lord Richard Ashton, Viscount Radley, my lady, she announced. Caroline exchanged an alarmed glance with Alexander. Please inform Lord Radley that I am indisposed. I've already advised him of your prior engagement, my lady, the maid replied. He insists it's a matter of urgency regarding Willowmere Estate. Lady Harewood rose from her seat. Show him in, Jenkins. But inform him Lady Caroline can spare only a few minutes. Richard entered moments later, his expression souring instantly upon seeing the Duke. Pemberton, how unexpected to find you here. Radley, Alexander acknowledged with cool formality, remaining seated beside Caroline in a clear indication of his established presence. Richard turned to Caroline. I require a private conversation regarding family matters, cousin. Anything concerning Willowmere can surely be discussed in the presence of my godmother, Caroline replied. And his grace was kind enough to call, so I cannot dismiss him without grave discourtesy. Richard's jaw tightened. Very well. I've discovered discrepancies in the estate accounts during the final months of Edmund's life. Substantial sums withdrawn without clear purpose. As I explained at the reading of the will, I was not privy to my husband's financial decisions, Caroline said evenly. Yet as his widow, you might possess documents or correspondence that could illuminate these matters. Richard's gaze flicked meaningfully to a small writing desk in the corner, Edmund's, which Caroline had brought from Willowmere. Edmund was meticulous in his record-keeping. I find it difficult to believe he left no explanation for transactions amounting to over £5,000. Alexander shifted slightly beside her. £5,000 is indeed a significant sum. When exactly were these withdrawals made, Radley? Richard's expression closed. I don't recall soliciting your input, Pemberton. This is a family matter. Of course, Alexander replied smoothly. My apologies for the intrusion. If you believe specific documents exist, Lord Radley, you might describe them so I can search more effectively, Caroline suggested. A ledger bound in green leather, Richard said after a moment's hesitation. Edmund mentioned it in a letter shortly before his death. Alexander's hand brushed Caroline's briefly as he reached for his teacup, a subtle gesture of warning. Fascinating that the Viscount would discuss account books in personal correspondence. My cousin was thorough in all matters, Richard replied stiffly. Now if you'll excuse us, Pemberton, perhaps Lady Caroline and I could continue this discussion privately. I'm afraid that won't be possible, Lady Harewood interjected. Caroline has several callers expected this afternoon, and we mustn't disrupt her schedule. Perhaps you could put your inquiries in writing, Lord Radley. Richard's face flushed with barely suppressed anger. As you wish. I shall correspond formally. He bowed curtly. Lady Caroline, Lady Harewood, Your Grace. After Richard departed, an uncomfortable silence settled over the drawing-room. Well, Lady Harewood said finally, I believe I shall check on tea arrangements and give you a moment to recover from that interesting encounter. She departed with a meaningful glance at Caroline. Once they were alone, Alexander leaned forward. Do not give Richard any documents from your husband's desk. Not until I've had an opportunity to investigate further. You truly believe Edmund was involved in something illicit? I believe Richard's sudden interest in specific documents, combined with what I already suspect about the Caribbean Trading Consortium, warrants caution. His blue eyes were intense with concern. Promise me you'll be careful. Richard Ashton strikes me as a man who values inheritance above integrity. Caroline nodded slowly. I promise. But you must tell me what you discover. You have my word. He hesitated, then took her hand. Caroline. May I call you Caroline when we're speaking privately? The informal address sent a flutter through her chest. Yes. Caroline, there are forces at work here beyond a simple matter of inheritance. If my suspicions are correct, your husband's death may not have been the accident it appeared to be. She drew in a sharp breath. You cannot mean... I don't know yet, but I intend to find out. His thumb traced a gentle circle on the back of her hand. In the meantime, I hope you'll allow me to continue calling on you. for reasons entirely separate from this investigation. The warmth in his eyes left no doubt as to his meaning. Despite the troubling revelations about Edmund, Caroline felt a surge of unexpected joy at his words. "I would like that very much," she admitted softly. Their moment of connection was interrupted by Lady Harewood's return with the tea tray. The remainder of Alexander's call passed in pleasant conversation about music, literature, and his estate at Briarwood. Ordinary topics that felt extraordinary simply because Caroline was permitted to express genuine opinions, a freedom Edmund had never allowed. As Alexander rose to leave, he bowed over her hand. "With your permission, I would like to escort you on a carriage ride through Hyde Park tomorrow afternoon." "A public appearance," Caroline noted. "You realize what that will signify?" "I do," he confirmed, his expression serious yet warm. "The question is whether you are prepared for what will follow." Caroline thought of the lonely years stretching behind her, and the unexpected possibility of joy that now presented itself. "Yes," she said with more confidence than she felt. "I am." The following weeks transformed Caroline's position in London society. The Duke of Pemberton's marked attention elevated her from unfortunate widow to the subject of intense fascination. Daily he sent small tokens, books of poetry, sheet music, once even a small painting of Willowmere commissioned from a renowned landscape artist who had apparently been dispatched to capture the view specifically for her. Their carriage rides through Hyde Park became a regular occurrence, as did his attendance at the small musical evenings Lady Harewood hosted. When Caroline played the pianoforte, Alexander turned pages for her, their hands occasionally brushing in a manner that sent electricity coursing through her veins. Not everyone approved of this rapid courtship. Lord Westmoreland had withdrawn his attentions with dignified grace, but Richard Ashton had become increasingly vocal in his disapproval, hinting to anyone who would listen that Caroline had neglected proper mourning protocols and was pursuing the Duke's fortune with unseemly haste. Lady Jersey, the formidable patroness of Almack's, had initially sniffed at the match, but Alexander's unwavering attention eventually softened even her stance. "The Duke has always been eccentric in his choices," she was overheard saying at Lady Pembroke's dinner, "but one cannot deny the lady carries herself with dignity despite her circumstances." Throughout this social whirlwind, Alexander continued his discreet investigation into Edmund's business dealings. Occasionally he would ask Caroline seemingly innocuous questions about her late husband's associates or travel habits, careful never to discuss such matters where they might be overheard. 6 weeks after their first waltz, Alexander invited Caroline to tour the Pemberton House Art Gallery, accompanied by Lady Harewood. The magnificent townhouse on Grosvenor Square impressed even the Dowager Countess, who had seen the grandest homes in England. "Your collection is remarkable," Caroline observed as they moved through the gallery. Renaissance masterpieces hung alongside more contemporary works by Turner and Constable. "My grandfather was the true collector," Alexander explained. "I've merely added pieces that speak to me personally." He guided her toward a small alcove where a single painting hung, a rendering of a young woman in a garden, her face turned slightly away as she reached for a rose. "This is my most recent acquisition." Caroline studied the painting. "She reminds me of someone, though I cannot place whom." "I purchased it because the subject's profile resembled yours," Alexander admitted quietly. "The artist captured a sense of longing that I recognized in you that first evening at Lady Harewood's." Lady Harewood, sensing the intimate turn of conversation, discreetly moved to examine a sculpture several yards away. "Alexander," Caroline began, using his given name for the first time. "What is happening between us? Everything has proceeded so quickly." He took her gloved hand, his expression earnest. "What's happening is that I am falling in love with you, Caroline. I have been since that first waltz, perhaps even since Lady Hamilton's musical years ago, though I didn't recognize it then." The declaration, though half expected given his attentions, still stole her breath. "We've known each other such a short time." "Some souls recognize each other instantly," he replied. "I know your favorite composer is Beethoven. I know you prefer prose to poetry, but make an exception for Wordsworth. I know you take your tea with honey instead of sugar, and that you unconsciously touch the emerald ring on your right hand when you're anxious, as you're doing now." Caroline glanced down, surprised to find he was correct. The emerald had been her mother's, the only piece of jewelry Edmund hadn't selected for her. "I know you are unhappy in your marriage," Alexander continued gently, "and I know you fear allowing yourself to hope for something different. How can you be certain?" she whispered. "How can you know that what you feel now won't change once the novelty fades? Because what draws me to you isn't novelty, but substance." He stepped closer. "Caroline, I don't expect an answer today, but I want you to know my intentions are honorable and my feelings sincere. When you're ready, if you're ready, I hope you'll consider a future with me." Before she could respond, the gallery door opened, and Alexander's butler appeared with a silver salver. "Forgive the interruption, Your Grace, but an urgent message has arrived." Alexander excused himself to read the note, his expression growing troubled as he scanned its contents. "Is something wrong?" Caroline asked when he returned. "My agent has uncovered information about the Caribbean trading consortium that requires immediate attention." He glanced at Lady Harewood. "I'm afraid I must cut our visit short. My carriage will return you both to Harewood House." "Of course," Caroline replied, concern evident in her voice. "Is there anything I can do?" "Keep the writing desk secure," he said in a low voice, "and be wary of Richard. I'll call tomorrow to explain everything." But Alexander did not call the next day, nor did any message arrive explaining his absence. By the third day without word, Caroline's worry had transformed into a gnawing fear that something was terribly wrong. "This is most unlike Alexander," Lady Harewood said, as they sat in the drawing-room that evening. "He would not simply disappear without explanation, particularly after such a significant conversation." "Perhaps he's reconsidered his declaration," Caroline suggested, though she didn't believe it herself. Alexander's feelings had been too genuine, his attention too consistent for such an abrupt reversal. "Nonsense!" Her godmother rang for the butler. "Phillips, please send a footman to Pemberton House with a note inquiring after the Duke's welfare." The footman returned an hour later with a troubling report. "The Duke's household staff informed me that His Grace departed suddenly for his estate in Kent 3 days ago, my lady. No expected return date was provided." Caroline's unease deepened. Briarwood, Alexander's Kent estate, bordered Willowmere. The coincidence seemed too great. "Something isn't right," she said, after the footman withdrew. "Alexander would have sent word if he planned to leave London." Lady Harewood studied her goddaughter's worried expression. "You care for him deeply, don't you?" "I do," Caroline admitted, "more than I thought possible after Edmund." "Then trust that feeling," the Countess advised. "Alexander Sinclair is not a man who acts without purpose. If he's gone to Kent without explanation, he has good reason." The following morning brought an unexpected visitor, James Blackwood, Earl of Westmoreland. Though he had withdrawn from actively courting Caroline after Alexander's interest became evident, they had maintained a cordial friendship. "Lady Caroline," he bowed, "forgive the unannounced call. Lord Westmoreland, how lovely to see you." Caroline gestured to a chair. "Please, sit." Once seated, the Earl leaned forward, his expression serious. "I've come with news I thought you should hear directly rather than through society gossip. It concerns the Duke of Pemberton." Caroline's heart stuttered. "Is he well?" "Physically, yes, as far as I know, but his reputation may soon suffer." Lord Westmoreland hesitated. "Richard Ashton is circulating rumours that Pemberton has been investigating your late husband's business dealings without authorization, potentially interfering with matters of inheritance." "That's absurd," Caroline protested. "Alexander has done nothing improper." "Perhaps not. But Lord Radley is presenting it as though Pemberton is attempting to uncover financial resources that rightfully belong to the estate, resources you might be concealing." The accusation was so outrageous that Caroline nearly laughed. "I have nothing to conceal. Edmund left me with barely enough to maintain a modest household." "I believe you," Lord Westmoreland assured her, "but Richard is a persuasive speaker, and his position as the new Viscount lends weight to his claims. There's more. He's suggesting that your relationship with Pemberton began before Edmund's death." Caroline paled. "That is a complete fabrication." "I know," the Earl said gently. "I thought you should be prepared for what might be said in drawing-rooms across London. And," he hesitated, "I wanted to offer my assistance, should you need a friend during this difficult time." His kindness touched her deeply. "Thank you, James. Your friendship means a great deal to me." After Lord Westmoreland departed, Caroline made a decision. If Alexander had gone to Kent, Perhaps the answers she sought lay at Willowmere. The estate was no longer her home, but she knew its grounds and neighbouring properties intimately. "I must return to Willowmere," she told Lady Harewood that evening. "Alone?" her godmother questioned. "That would be most unwise, particularly with Richard's rumours circulating." "Then come with me," Caroline suggested. "We'll claim a desire to retrieve personal items I left behind. Richard can hardly object to that." Lady Harewood considered the proposal. "It could work. But Caroline, what do you hope to find?" "I'm not certain," she admitted, "but I believe Alexander went to Kent because he discovered something significant about Edmund's business dealings, something connected to Willowmere itself." 2 days later, their carriage rolled through the familiar gates of Willowmere Estate. The spring sunshine illuminated the stone facade of the house where Caroline had spent 6 unhappy years. Richard was in London, but his housekeeper, Mrs. Graves, a dour woman who had always treated Caroline with barely concealed disdain, greeted them with obvious suspicion. "Lord Radley didn't inform me of your visit, Lady Caroline." "It was decided rather suddenly," Caroline replied smoothly. "I realized I had left some personal correspondence in my former chambers. I won't disturb anything else." "I shall accompany you," Mrs. Graves insisted. "That won't be necessary," Lady Harewood interjected with aristocratic authority. "Lady Caroline knows precisely where her belongings are located. We shan't be long." Reluctantly, the housekeeper withdrew, though Caroline suspected she would hover nearby. Once in her former bedchamber, Caroline moved purposefully toward a loose floorboard beneath the window seat, a hiding place she had discovered years ago when searching for a dropped hairpin. Edmund had never known of its existence. "What exactly are we looking for?" Lady Harewood whispered, keeping watch at the door. "I'm not certain." Caroline worked the floorboard free, revealing a small cavity. Inside lay a folded document she had hidden there shortly after Edmund's death, a letter that had arrived the day after his fatal accident, which she had intercepted before Richard arrived to claim the estate. The letter bore no return address or signature, only a small embossed image of a sailing ship that matched the description of the Caribbean Trading Consortium medallion. Liverpool arrangement compromised. Destroy all records. Meeting at usual location cancelled. Use Eastern Passage if contact necessary. B reports interference from P committee. Caution advised. S. What does it mean? Lady Harewood asked after reading the cryptic message. "I'm not certain," Caroline replied, "but P committee could refer to Alexander's Parliamentary Committee on Maritime Regulations. He mentioned it was investigating unusual shipping losses." "And the Eastern Passage?" Lady Harewood's eyes widened. "There's an old smuggler's tunnel on the eastern boundary of Willowmere, isn't there, near where Edmund's hunting grounds adjoin Briarwood?" Caroline nodded slowly. "Edmund claimed it was sealed decades ago, but perhaps—" A creaking floorboard in the hallway alerted them to Mrs. Graves's approach. Caroline quickly replaced the letter and floorboard, moving to the writing desk as the housekeeper appeared in the doorway. "Have you found what you were seeking, Lady Caroline?" Her tone suggested she doubted the legitimacy of their search. "Almost," Caroline replied, rummaging through the desk drawer for correspondence she had genuinely left behind. "Ah, here they are. Letters from my mother. Sentimental value, you understand." As they prepared to depart, Caroline casually suggested a walk through the gardens. "The roses should be blooming soon. I'd like to see them once more." Mrs. Graves clearly disapproved, but could hardly refuse the former mistress of Willowmere such a simple request. The gardens led naturally toward the eastern boundary of the estate, where dense woodland separated Willowmere from Briarwood. "The entrance to the tunnel should be near the old gamekeeper's cottage," Caroline murmured to her godmother as they strolled among the budding rose bushes. "If we could somehow slip away." Their opportunity came when Mrs. Cooper, the head gardener's wife, approached with questions about the conservatory plants. While Mrs. Graves was distracted, Caroline and Lady Harewood made their way swiftly toward the tree line. The gamekeeper's cottage stood abandoned, its thatched roof partially collapsed from years of neglect. Behind it, half hidden by ivy and brambles, was an outcropping of stone that local legend claimed concealed the entrance to an ancient smuggler's passage. "How exactly do you propose to open a sealed tunnel?" Lady Harewood asked practically. Before Caroline could respond, a rustling sound from the trees behind them caused both women to turn in alarm. "I thought I might find you here," came a familiar voice. Caroline's heart leaped as Alexander emerged from the woods, his normally immaculate appearance somewhat disheveled, as though he had been traveling for days without rest. "Alexander!" She rushed toward him, propriety forgotten in her relief. "What happened? Why did you disappear?" He caught her hands in his. "Forgive me for leaving without explanation. I received information that Edmund's death might not have been accidental, and that similar evidence was hidden somewhere on the boundary between Willowmere and Briarwood." "The tunnel," Caroline breathed. "That's why you came here." "Yes. I've spent the past 5 days exploring the network of passages that run beneath both estates." His expression grew serious. "Caroline, what I've discovered confirms my worst suspicions. The Caribbean Trading Consortium was a front for smuggling operations, not merely goods, but information and persons of interest across the Channel to France." Lady Harewood gasped. "During wartime, that would be treason," Alexander finished grimly. "Yes, Edmund was deeply involved, along with several other peers whose financial difficulties made them vulnerable to recruitment." Caroline felt the ground tilt beneath her. "Edmund was a traitor. He was a man with expensive tastes and dwindling resources," Alexander said gently. "When approached with an opportunity to restore his fortunes through clandestine activities, he apparently succumbed to temptation." "But his death," Caroline began, "was almost certainly arranged by his co-conspirators when my committee's investigation came too close to exposing their operation." Alexander's jaw tightened. "The same conspirators who now want to silence anyone who might connect them to Edmund's activities." "Richard," Caroline whispered, "he's been searching for documents, evidence that could implicate him." "Precisely. Though I believe Richard became involved after Edmund's death, when he discovered hints of his cousin's secret wealth." Alexander turned toward the cottage. "The entrance is inside, beneath the hearthstones. I've found documents hidden in a chamber beyond that prove everything. Names, dates, shipments. Enough to bring the entire operation to justice." "Then we must get them to London immediately," Lady Harewood insisted. Alexander nodded. "My carriage is waiting on the Briarwood side of the woods. We can—" A voice from behind them cut through the clearing. "How convenient that you're all here together. It simplifies matters considerably." Richard Ashton stepped into view, a hunting rifle trained steadily on Alexander's chest. Behind him stood 2 rough-looking men, similarly armed. "I suspected you might return to Willowmere," Richard said to Caroline. "Though I admit, I didn't anticipate Pemberton would be foolish enough to join you so openly." "It's over, Ashton," Alexander said calmly. "I've already sent copies of the evidence to my solicitors in London. If anything happens to us, it will be delivered directly to the Home Office." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Richard's face before his expression hardened again. "You're bluffing. You wouldn't have had time to copy everything." "Are you willing to gamble your life on that assumption?" Alexander countered. The tense standoff was broken by the sound of approaching horses, a full complement of riders bearing the insignia of the Home Office, led by none other than Lord Westmoreland. "Lower your weapons," the Earl commanded, "by order of His Majesty's government." Richard's men hesitated, then complied. Richard himself remained defiant, his rifle still aimed at Alexander. "It's finished, Richard," Caroline said quietly. "Please, don't make this worse than it already is." Something in her tone reached him. With a curse, Richard lowered his weapon. As the Home Office men took Richard and his companions into custody, Lord Westmoreland approached Caroline, Lady Harewood, and Alexander. "I received your message," he said to Alexander, "though I confess I didn't expect to find you all in such perilous circumstances." Alexander clasped the Earl's hand gratefully. "Your timing is impeccable, James. How did you know where to find us?" "Lady Harewood's maid mentioned your destination when I called at Harewood House," James explained. "Given what you'd shared about Ashton's involvement in the smuggling ring, I thought it prudent to follow with reinforcements." Caroline looked between the 2 men in confusion. "You were working together?" "Not initially," Alexander admitted. "But when my investigation began pointing toward treasonous activities, I needed someone with connections to the Home Office. James and I have been friends since Oxford, despite our occasional rivalry." Lord Westmoreland smiled ruefully. "When Pemberton explained the danger you might be in, Lady Caroline, our collaboration became a simple matter. Some things transcend personal disappointment." As Home Office officials entered the gamekeeper's cottage to retrieve the hidden documents, Alexander drew Caroline aside. "I owe you an explanation and an apology," he said. "I should have trusted you with the full truth from the beginning." "You were protecting me," Caroline replied. "Though in the future I would prefer honesty to protection." His eyes warmed at her words. "The future," he repeated softly. "Does that mean you've considered my question from the gallery?" Caroline looked up at him, this man who had risked everything to uncover the truth and protect her reputation. "I have." "And?" he prompted when she didn't continue. "And I find that despite my best efforts to maintain a sensible caution," she said with a smile that reached her eyes for the first time in years, "I have fallen quite irretrievably in love with you, Alexander Sinclair." He drew her hands to his lips, kissing them fervently. "Then if you'll permit me, I shall ask properly once we're safely back in London, with considerably more romance and far fewer rifles pointed in our direction." Caroline laughed, the sound bright and free in the spring air. "I'd like that very much." The scandal that erupted following Richard Ashton's arrest shook London society to its foundations. Treason among the aristocracy was the sort of delicious outrage that sustained the Ton's gossip for months. That the Duke of Pemberton had been instrumental in uncovering the conspiracy only enhanced his already considerable standing. Caroline, however, found herself in a precarious position. As Edmund's widow, suspicion initially fell on her as well, despite Alexander's vehement defense of her innocence. For 2 agonizing weeks, she endured questioning from Home Office officials and thinly veiled accusations in the press. The tide began to turn when Lord Westmoreland publicly vouched for her character, followed by statements from other respected peers who had observed her conduct since returning to London. Lady Jersey, in a remarkable demonstration of support, invited Caroline to Almack's and pointedly engaged her in conversation throughout the evening. "The Ton may love a scandal," Lady Harewood observed, "but they love redemption even more, particularly when it involves a duke in love," and Alexander was undeniably in love. Throughout the investigation and subsequent trial preparations, he remained steadfastly by Caroline's side, his devotion evident to anyone with eyes to see. When the Home Office finally cleared her of any knowledge or involvement in her late husband's treasonous activities, Alexander hosted a small celebration dinner at Pemberton House. "To new beginnings," he toasted, raising his glass to Caroline across the table. Their courtship, which had begun with such intensity before the revelations at Willowmere, resumed with greater depth and understanding. Alexander invited Caroline and Lady Harewood to Briarwood, where Caroline delighted in the extensive library and magnificent gardens that had been designed by Capability Brown himself. "My mother loved this view," Alexander told her, as they strolled along the terraced lawn overlooking the Kent countryside. "She would sit for hours sketching the landscape." "It's easy to see why," Caroline replied, breathing in the scent of lilacs carried on the summer breeze. "There's a serenity here that nourishes the soul." That's precisely what she used to say. He took her hand, drawing her toward a stone bench beneath an ancient oak tree. "Caroline, there's something I wish to ask you." Her heart quickened as he guided her to sit, then knelt before her on one knee. "6 months ago I attended a dinner party, out of obligation to an old family friend," he began, his blue eyes holding hers with unwavering intensity. "I had no expectation that evening would change my life. Then I saw you, not merely your beauty, which is considerable, but the quiet dignity with which you carried yourself, despite the pain I glimpsed behind your smile." He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box. "Every day since has only deepened my conviction that you are the woman I have waited for all my life. Your courage, your compassion, your strength in the face of adversity, these have humbled and inspired me." Opening the box, he revealed a magnificent sapphire ring surrounded by diamonds. "This was my grandmother's, given to her by a man who adored her until his last breath. I can promise you no less devotion. Caroline Ashton, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears filled Caroline's eyes, not the silent tears of suffering she had shed for years, but tears of joy so profound it nearly overwhelmed her. "Yes," she whispered, her voice growing stronger with certainty. "Yes, Alexander, with all my heart, yes." His answering smile was radiant as he slid the ring onto her finger, then rose to gather her into his arms. Their kiss, tender yet passionate, sealed a promise that neither had dared to hope for at the beginning of the season. Lady Harewood, who had discreetly withdrawn to allow them privacy, returned to find them sitting together on the bench, Caroline's head resting on Alexander's shoulder. "I take it congratulations are in order?" the Countess asked, though the answer was evident in their expressions. "Indeed they are," Alexander replied, his arm tightening around Caroline. "Lady Harewood, may I formally request your blessing as Caroline's godmother?" The Dowager Countess smiled warmly. "You have had my blessing since the moment you waltzed with her at Lady Richmond's ball, Alexander." I recognized then what Caroline herself was only beginning to hope for, that genuine love was finally finding her. The announcement of their engagement appeared in the Morning Post the following week, creating a sensation that eclipsed even the ongoing scandal of the smuggling ring. That the Duke of Pemberton, England's most eligible bachelor, had chosen to marry the widow of a traitor was deemed either tremendously romantic or utterly baffling, depending on one's perspective. "They're saying I've ensnared you with feminine wiles," Caroline told Alexander, with a mixture of amusement and dismay as they reviewed the latest gossip sheets. "Considering I pursued you with single-minded determination from our first waltz, that seems rather backward," he replied, unperturbed. "Though I'm happy to credit you with whatever wiles assisted in making me fall desperately in love with you." Caroline laughed, a sound that had become wonderfully common in recent weeks. "You're impossible. Impossibly devoted," he corrected, bringing her hand to his lips. Their wedding was set for September, a relatively short engagement by aristocratic standards, but neither saw reason to delay. Lady Harewood took charge of the arrangements with characteristic efficiency, ensuring that the ceremony would be both elegant and dignified despite its swiftness. "Nothing ostentatious," Caroline insisted. "I've had enough of being a spectacle this year." The ceremony took place at St. George's, Hanover Square, the church filled with England's highest-ranking peers and their families. Caroline, radiant in ivory silk with antique Pemberton lace adorning her train, carried a bouquet of white roses and violets, a reminder of Alexander's first gift to her. As she walked down the aisle on Lord Westmoreland's arm, the Earl having graciously offered to give her away, Caroline caught sight of Alexander waiting at the altar. The love shining in his eyes banished the last shadows of doubt from her heart. This was not Edmund. This was a man who saw her truly, valued her completely, and loved her unconditionally. The vows were exchanged with clear, steady voices. When Alexander placed the Pemberton wedding ring, a band of gold that had graced the hand of every duchess for 2 centuries, beside the sapphire engagement ring, Caroline felt the weight of history and promise it represented. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the bishop declared. "Your Grace, you may kiss your duchess." Alexander's kiss was gentle yet possessive, a perfect balance that embodied their relationship. When they turned to face the congregation as the Duke and Duchess of Pemberton, the applause that erupted was deafening. The wedding breakfast at Pemberton House was a more intimate affair, with only close friends and family in attendance. Lady Harewood dabbed at her eyes repeatedly, while Lord Westmoreland offered a toast so heartfelt that even the most cynical guests were moved. "To finding love where least expected," the Earl concluded, raising his glass to the newlyweds, "and to the courage required to embrace it." Later, as they prepared to depart for their wedding journey to Italy, Alexander drew Caroline into the library for a private moment. "Happy, Duchess?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist. "Deliriously so," she replied, reaching up to touch his face, "though I'm still becoming accustomed to the title. It suits you perfectly." He kissed her forehead. "I have something for you. A wedding gift." From his desk, he retrieved a leather portfolio. "Open it," he encouraged. Inside, Caroline found documents bearing the seal of the Crown, the deed to Willowmere Estate. "Alexander," she gasped, "how is this possible? The estate was entailed to Richard." "The Crown seized all of Richard's properties following his conviction for treason," Alexander explained. "I petitioned for the right to purchase Willowmere, given its proximity to Briarwood. The request was granted last week." Caroline stared at the documents in disbelief. "You bought Willowmere, but why?" "Because it was your home for 6 years, and despite the unhappiness you experienced there, I thought you might wish to reclaim it on your own terms." His expression grew serious. "The memories you create in a place can transform it, Caroline. I thought perhaps we might make new memories at Willowmere, happy ones that would gradually overcome the painful past." Tears welled in her eyes at the profound thoughtfulness of his gift. You would do that for me? Even knowing what happened there? I would do anything for you, he said simply, including helping you rewrite the story of Willowmere, if that's what you wish. Or we never need set foot there again. The choice is entirely yours. Caroline studied the deed, emotions swirling through her heart. Willowmere had been her prison for 6 long years, yet the estate itself was innocent of Edmund's cruelty. The rose gardens, the rolling hills, the ancient oaks, they had offered solace during her darkest hours. I think, she said slowly, that I would like to visit occasionally. Perhaps we could renovate it as a summer home, or... She hesitated, then continued with greater certainty, a foundling home for orphaned girls, a place where they could learn and grow in safety, surrounded by beauty. Alexander's eyes lit with admiration. The Willowmere School for Young Ladies. It's perfect. Truly? You wouldn't mind? Mind? Caroline, your compassion is one of the countless reasons I love you. He kissed her softly. Willowmere transformed from a place of sorrow to one of opportunity and hope. I can think of no better legacy for us to build together. As their carriage departed London later that afternoon, Caroline watched the city recede through the window. 6 months ago, she had arrived as a widow with uncertain prospects and a heart scarred by years of neglect. Now she departed as a duchess, her heart healing and expanding with each day in Alexander's love. "What are you thinking?" Alexander asked, his hand covering hers. "That happiness found me when I least expected it," she replied, "and that sometimes the greatest act of courage is allowing oneself to hope again." He smiled, drawing her close against his side. "Then let us be courageous together, my Duchess, for all the days to come." As the carriage rolled through the countryside toward the future they would build together, Caroline knew with absolute certainty that her tears of sorrow had truly been transformed into tears of joy, not just for a moment, but for a lifetime. 1 year later. The September sunshine bathed the gardens of Willowmere in golden light as Caroline walked among the roses, now flourishing under the care of a new head gardener. The estate had undergone a remarkable transformation in the past year. The grim, oppressive atmosphere Edmund had cultivated, replaced by warmth and purpose. "Your Grace," called Miss Henderson, the headmistress Caroline had hired to oversee the newly established Willowmere School for Young Ladies. "The new pupils have arrived from London." Caroline smiled at the slender woman, who had proven an ideal choice for the position. Firm yet kind, with progressive ideas about female education that aligned perfectly with Caroline's vision. "Thank you, Miss Henderson. I'll come greet them shortly." Inside the manor, rooms once shrouded in darkness now burst with light. The drawing room where Caroline had spent countless lonely hours had been converted into a library filled with books on every subject: literature, mathematics, natural philosophy, languages. Edmund's imposing study was now a music room, the grim portraits replaced with landscapes and cheerful still lifes. 20 young girls between the ages of 8 and 16, all orphaned or abandoned, now called Willowmere Home. They wore simple but well-made uniforms, learned from qualified teachers, and were encouraged to develop their individual talents, whether academic, artistic, or practical. "They're a bit overwhelmed," Miss Henderson confided as they watched the newest arrivals explore the gardens. "Most have never seen anything beyond London's poorest districts." "They'll adjust," Caroline replied confidently. "Children are remarkably resilient when given security and kindness." A familiar voice called from the terrace, and Caroline turned to see Alexander striding toward her, their 6-month-old daughter Elizabeth cradled in his arms. "There you are," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Our little Duchess has been asking for her mother." Caroline took the baby, breathing in the sweet scent of her downy head. Elizabeth Grace Sinclair, with her father's blue eyes and her mother's auburn curls, was the living embodiment of their love, and the greatest joy Caroline had ever known. "How was your meeting with the Home Office?" she asked as they walked toward the new arrivals. "Productive. The Secretary has approved funding for similar schools in Yorkshire and Devon based on Willowmere's success." Alexander smiled proudly at his wife. "Your model for education and care has impressed even the most conservative members of government." Caroline's heart swelled with quiet satisfaction. What had begun as a personal project to reclaim Willowmere from painful memories had evolved into something far more significant, a template for how society might better care for its most vulnerable members. Lady Harewood's letter arrived this morning, she told Alexander as they paused to watch the girls being introduced to their new home. She's quite recovered from her winter cough and plans to visit next month, and James writes that his daughter is thriving with her new governess. Lord Westmoreland had remained a dear friend to them both. His initial disappointment at losing Caroline long since transformed into genuine pleasure at their happiness. His daughter, now 8, occasionally joined the Willowmere girls for special lessons. Your Grace, one of the new arrivals, a solemn-faced girl of about 10, approached hesitantly. Is it true we're to live here, all of us? Caroline knelt to the child's level, carefully balancing Elizabeth on her hip. Yes, this is your home now. You'll have your own bed, 3 meals a day, and lessons to help you build whatever future you dream of. The girl's eyes widened. I thought, in the orphanage they said girls like me couldn't dream of futures, just positions in service if we were lucky. The orphanage was mistaken, Alexander said gently, joining the conversation. Everyone deserves dreams, especially children who have faced difficult beginnings. The girl studied them both, as though searching for deception, then offered a tentative smile. Thank you, Your Grace, she said, dropping into a wobbly curtsy before running to join the other children. She reminds me of myself, Caroline murmured, watching the girl's retreating figure. So cautious about allowing herself to hope. Alexander wrapped an arm around his wife and daughter. And like you, she'll learn that hope is not merely a foolish fancy, but the foundation upon which we build meaningful lives. As the sun began its descent behind Willowmere's ancient oaks, Caroline reflected on the journey that had brought her here, the tears she had shed in these very gardens, the loneliness that had once permeated every corner of the estate, the fear that had been her constant companion, all transformed through love's remarkable alchemy. Later that evening, after Elizabeth had been settled in her nursery, Caroline joined Alexander in their private sitting room at Briarwood, adjacent to Willowmere. The two estates now functioned as a harmonious whole, Willowmere dedicated to education and renewal, Briarwood remaining their family home. The first day with new students is always both exhausting and exhilarating, she said, sinking into a comfortable chair near the fire. Alexander handed her a glass of wine, then claimed the seat opposite. You've created something extraordinary, Caroline. Those girls' lives will never be the same. We've created it together, she corrected. I couldn't have done any of this without you. You underestimate yourself, he replied with a fond smile. Your vision, your compassion, your determination, these would have found expression somehow, with or without me. Perhaps, she acknowledged, but I'm profoundly grateful it was with you. Alexander reached for her hand, his thumb caressing the Duchess's ring that now sat comfortably beside her sapphire. Do you ever think about how differently things might have unfolded if I hadn't attended Lady Harewood's dinner that night, or if you had refused my invitation to dance at Lady Richmond's ball? Sometimes, Caroline admitted. But then I remember something my mother once told me, that souls meant to find each other will do so, regardless of circumstance. Your mother was a wise woman. She would have adored you, Caroline said softly, almost as much as Elizabeth does. At the mention of their daughter, Alexander's expression softened further. I never imagined fatherhood would bring such joy. Watching her discover the world anew each day is a gift beyond measure. She has your curiosity, Caroline observed. Miss Phillips says she's already attempting to turn pages in her picture books, determined to see what comes next. And your tenacity. Once she sets her mind to something, there's no dissuading her. They shared a comfortable silence, savoring the peaceful conclusion to a fulfilling day. Through the window, Willowmere was visible in the distance, its windows glowing with welcoming light, so different from the forbidding silhouette it had once presented. I received a letter from the solicitor handling Richard's affairs, Alexander said after a while. He's been transported to Australia. Apparently he's been permitted to retain a small allowance from his mother's settlement, enough to establish a modest existence there. Caroline nodded thoughtfully. I hope he finds a way to build a better life. Despite everything, I cannot wish him ill. Your capacity for forgiveness continues to astonish me, Alexander said, genuine admiration in his voice. Not forgiveness exactly, she clarified. Understanding, perhaps. Richard, like Edmund, made choices driven by greed and entitlement, but I refuse to allow their darkness any lingering power over our happiness. Alexander rose from his chair, drawing Caroline to her feet and into his arms. "Have I mentioned today how much I love you, Duchess?" She pretended to consider the question. "I believe you might have mentioned it over breakfast, and again while we were reviewing the school's accounts, and once more when you found me in the rose garden." He silenced her teasing with a kiss that still held the power to make her heart race. "Then let me say it again. I love you, Caroline Sinclair, with everything I am and everything I hope to become." "And I love you," she replied, resting her head against his chest. "My heart, my home, my happiness." They stood together, wrapped in each other's arms as twilight deepened into night outside their window. The road that had led Caroline from tears to triumph had been neither straight nor easy, but standing here now, she knew with absolute certainty that every step, even the painful ones, had been leading her home. From the Willowmere school, voices of young girls singing their evening hymn drifted across the grounds, a sweet chorus of hope rising into the star-filled sky. And in that moment, the circle felt complete. What had once been a place of solitary sorrow now rang with shared joy. What had been broken now restored. What had been lost now gloriously found. Caroline's tears had indeed been transformed, not merely dried, but transfigured into something precious and enduring. In Alexander's love, in Elizabeth's laughter, in the renewed purpose of Willowmere, and in her own heart that had dared to hope again, she had found not just a new beginning, but a rich and beautiful continuation of life's most profound journey. "Come, my Duchess," Alexander said softly, leading her toward their bedchamber. "Tomorrow brings new adventures." And Caroline followed willingly, secure in the knowledge that whatever those adventures might hold, they would face them together, with courage, with compassion, and with the unwavering certainty of a love that had overcome every obstacle to bloom fully at last. Dear listener, I hope you've enjoyed this tale of love, redemption, and new beginnings. Thank you for allowing Lady Caroline and Alexander's journey to bring some comfort and warmth to your heart. We create these moments of escape specifically for you, to provide relaxation and positive emotions in your day. Your continued support means everything to us. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for allowing these stories to become part of your life. Until our next historical adventure together, may you be safe, may your days be filled with joy, and may you always believe in the possibility of love transforming even the most difficult circumstances. With all our gratitude, Legends of the Fall Team. If the journey of Lady Caroline and the Duke of Pemberton touched your heart, we kindly invite you to subscribe to our channel, like this video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who loves historical romance. Your support allows us to continue bringing to life stories filled with love, redemption, and meaningful twists of fate. It is because of you that these tales exist, and from the bottom of our hearts, thank you. At the end of this video, you'll see a suggestion for another of our stories. We hope you'll click and let yourself be swept away once more by another unforgettable journey. With heartfelt thanks, until the next chapter, the Legends of the Fall Team.